You know, you're an excessive self-conscious person. You know that?
What?
You only feel that way because you think that she's harassing you.
No way. I mustered up my courage to consult my husband about it, but instead of being understanding, he blamed me.
If you don't like it, then why don't you just leave? But, well, you don't have a home to go back to since your parents are both gone, haha.
My husband snickered at me as he said that. I clenched my fists and glared at him. Fine, I'll go back to my parents' house. My name is Gloria. I'm 30 years old and I work in a company. It has been 2 years since I married my husband, Manny. I first met Manny while I was at work. We were both in charge of a project together. And since we began working together many times, we gradually became closer. My husband was 3 years older than me and I was attracted to him early on, partly because he was much more mature and stable. When a project we were working on together came to a close, he invited me to dinner, and we began seeing each other privately as well. Not long after that, we started dating and got married a year later. One of the reasons I decided to marry him was because of his kindness. My mother died when I was very young, and my father also died of illness when I had just started working. My parents were originally from the countryside, and I hardly had any connections with our relatives, so I had no one to rely on and was left on my own. My husband felt sorry that I had no parents and often took me to his parents' house for dinner. My in-laws were very kind, and my mother-in-law, Tessa, told me that they had always wanted a daughter, and I felt the warmth of family for the first time in a long time. After that, I visited my parents-in-law's house several times, and each time they were kind to me, so I thought I could build a good relationship with them even after marrying Manny. And even after we got married, I visited my parents-in-law's house regularly. My in-laws never changed their attitude after I married my husband, and they always greeted us warmly. Oh, I am so glad that you married Manny, Gloria. I was worried about him because he is my only son and it was hard to find a good wife for him. Thank you so much. I was really happy to hear that from my in-laws. But then something very sad happened. My father-in-law fell ill and passed away. When my husband and I rushed to the hospital room, Tessa was all in tears. My husband was also really shocked by the sudden event. I had thought I had found a family again, but I was so sad to have lost one so quickly. Tessa was so depressed that she was not going to be able to prepare for the funeral. I took over for her and proceeded to make arrangements for the funeral. I wanted to do whatever I could do to help her. My husband and I made the funeral arrangements together, and we were able to hold the funeral without any issues. Many people attended my father-in-law's funeral, and everyone gave him a good send-off, saying their goodbyes. And when the funeral was all over, my husband said this to me.
Since Mom must be lonely on her own, why don't we move in with her?
It was a proposal to move in with Tessa. Normally, I would have hesitated, but I immediately agreed to move in with Tessa. I had a good relationship with her, and I had no parents who I could take care of. I wanted my husband to take care of Tessa as much as possible, and I was willing to help him achieve one of those things by moving in with Tessa. My husband was very happy when I agreed to his suggestion.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Now I won't have to make my mom feel lonely.
Soon after, we moved to Tessa's house and started living together with her. Even after we started living together, Tessa was really kind. I made fried chicken today. Wow, it looks very delicious. You're always working so hard. Eat up. Thank you so much. Like this, we were spending happy days as a family. But little by little, Tessa's attitude started to change gradually. Oh, Gloria, you're getting in bath right now? Huh? Yes, that's what I was planning to do.
How dare you? Manny hasn't even gotten in the bath yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard Manny had a drinking party today, so I thought he might be home late. You don't have to make excuses. You're becoming shameless day by day, aren't you? Huh? Oh, I didn't mean it that way, but I'm sorry. Tessa began to complain to me about everything since then. I was bothered, wondering why her attitude had changed like that. And one day I found out the reason. Gloria, can you just do something about this? Huh? What are you talking about? When are you going to get pregnant and have a baby? Finally, Tessa said what had been bothering her. It has been 3 years since you got married to Manny, right? I think it's normal to have at least one child and show my grandchild's face to me. Tessa seemed to be angry that we couldn't have children. I am sorry. We are trying to have a baby, but we aren't in a hurry too. We were just talking about how it's a blessing once we have a baby and we should wait for it to happen naturally. Are you making excuses like that again? You really are so dishonest, and your attitude is so bad. You brought Manny into it too, and made it sound like it wasn't your fault. Is it because you were raised by a single parent? Excuse me? I was stunned to hear her say such a thing. I didn't think these words came from Tessa, who had been so kind to me until then. After that, Tessa began to verbally abuse me. If you are a wife, you are supposed to stay at home and support your husband. But you're so arrogant to push through your own selfishness and continue working. It must be because you were spoiled all your life. You never have children, you never quit your job, and you are a really bad wife. I have never met a woman with such a terrible attitude like you. Every time we saw each other, she would say things like that, and I became more and more stressed. I wondered where Tessa, who was so kind to me back then, had gone to. And Tessa mainly began to bully me when my husband was not around. My husband did not know that I was being treated that way by Tessa. But I could not stand it any longer, and decided to talk to my husband about it. Manny, would you please tell Tessa that she has been treating me badly for quite some time now?
What? Treating you badly?
Yeah, she's been saying some pretty heartless things to me. When I said that, my husband looked annoyed and scratched his head.
Is that true? I don't think my mother would do something like that, though.
I didn't think Tessa would ever treat me like this either. But lately, she's been really aggressive with me.
You know, you're an excessive self-conscious person, you know that?
What?
You only feel that way because you think that she's harassing you.
No way. I mustered up my courage to consult my husband about it, but instead of being understanding, he blamed me. And after that, Manny and Tessa started to pick on me.
Why do you eat the same food as me when I make more money than you?
You're right, honey. She should just only eat the leftovers.
That's right. Oh yeah, Mom, let's go out for some nice Italian sometime. Just the two of us. She has no right to eat nice meals, so let's make her stay at home.
Sounds good. Just you and me. You'd better clean up around the house while we're gone. Tessa and Manny enjoyed excluding me from the family. They would turn away my clothes for laundry, only prepare dinner for them and not me, and always tell me to take the bath last, then drain the water from the tub before I could even get in. They did this to me every day, and I was getting tired of how they were treating me. In the end, I just couldn't stand it anymore. Can you both please stop this? What in the world did I do? I asked for help because Tessa was treating me so badly, and now you and Tessa are bullying me.
If you don't like it, then why don't you just leave? But well, you don't have a home to go back to since your parents are both gone, haha. My husband snickered at me as he said that. At this moment, something snapped in me. There was nothing more I could say to him. I clenched my fists and glared at my husband. Fine. I'm going back to my parents' house. What? Your parents' house?
My husband widened his eyes and then laughed out loud.
What are you being so stubborn for? Your parents are gone, so you don't have a home or place to go back to, do you?
I'm not being stubborn. I'm leaving here because I can't keep going on like this with you anymore.
Oh, really? Is that so? Then just pack up your stuff and get out of here. I got scammed by marrying a useless person like you who can't even get pregnant with our child.
I couldn't believe that I was married to someone who would say such terrible things to me. I lost all affection for my husband at once. As I was packing my bags, Tessa came over here. You're finally leaving, huh? I'm so glad to get rid of this parasite from our family. Get the hell out of here. Don't ever let me see your face again. Tessa would say such terrible things to me like that, but I completely ignored her and continued to pack my bags. Later on, after I finished moving out, I went to the city office to pick up the divorce papers and mail them to Manny. Manny immediately returned the signed divorce papers, so I filed them, and my divorce from my ex-husband was finalized. I then focused on my work, but about 2 years after my divorce, I fell in love again when I reconnected with a childhood friend, Tom. He and I had gone to kindergarten through high school together, but we drifted apart when he went out of state for college. And after my father passed away and I sold our house, I no longer had the opportunity to visit him near his parents' house, which made it even more difficult for me to see him. It just so happened that I was having drinks with a classmate from high school when someone called Tom over and we met again. Then we catched up, talked about what was happening in our lives, and we started seeing each other as well. After that, we began to go out, and then found out that I was pregnant. So we decided to get married, even though pregnancy came first. I had met his parents many times since I was a child, and they treated me as if I were their own daughter. We then bought a house and lived happily together with our newborn child. Then, it was around that time, I suddenly bumped into my ex-husband again.
What? Hey, aren't you Gloria?
When I turned to him, I saw my ex-husband and a young woman with a really heavy makeup on next to him.
What are you doing here?
I was standing in front of the apartment building where I lived at the time. My husband had told me he had forgotten something back at the apartment, so I had gone ahead and took the elevator down.
This is in front of a luxury apartment building. Do you even know that? If you just stand there like that, people will think you're suspicious, you know?
My ex-husband said as he snickered. The young woman next to him also said, I mean, you already look like a suspicious person. We just met and she was already being rude to me like that. I ignored her, but my ex-husband didn't like it and began to pick on me.
Hey, how dare you ignore me? I'm sure a poor and parentless person like you lived a miserable life in a really cheap apartment anyway, right?
My ex-husband began to assume such things about me and began to bully me once again. Then finally, Tom came out from the entrance.
I'm sorry, Gloria. I went back inside since I realized I forgot to bring extra diapers.
So that's why you were late, huh?
Huh? Do you know these people?
He's my ex-husband. It seems like he happened to walk by here and began to pick on me. If you hadn't forgotten something, I wouldn't have had to see that prick's face.
I'm sorry.
I'm just joking, honey. It's true that this guy is a prick, though. I looked at my ex-husband contemptuously. My ex-husband's face turned pale when he found out that my current husband came out of the apartment and that Tom and I were living in the same apartment and even had a child together.
You're living here? Plus, you have a child.
Yes, I am. Manny was in shock. I guess he was shocked that I, whom he had made fun of earlier, was more successful than he was. And since it was a good opportunity, I told him something. By the way, When I left your parents' house, I really actually had a family home to go back to. My father was a wealthy man and owned several properties. Before he died of illness, I inherited his properties so that I could receive the income made from his properties. The family home that I lived in with my father was already sold when he died, but it sold for thousands of dollars, so I had a good amount of savings. When I left, I lived by myself in one of the rooms of the rental apartment my father owned.
No way. You're wealthy? Why didn't you tell me that when we were married?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not so sure, but I thought I'd keep it from you. Maybe, subconsciously, I didn't really trust you or Tessa. But I have to give myself a pat on the back for the way I used to be. Because both you and Tessa were bullying me terribly. And now you're changing your attitude towards me after finding out that I'm wealthy. I'm really glad we had a divorce before you found out about how wealthy I am. Thanks to you, I'm happily married now, and we are blessed with a child. Oh, and since I was able to get pregnant, if you can't have kids, maybe it's because of you. Well, I'm gonna go now. If you start hanging around here, I will report you immediately. As I said this to him, my ex-husband's face got even more pale, and it seemed like he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The young woman next to my ex-husband said, "How lame," and let go of her arm that was around his arm, and walked away by herself. I got into the car with my husband and our child and left. A little while later, the general manager of the company where my ex-husband worked came into the office where I worked for a business meeting, and I decided to ask him about my ex-husband. The manager looked a little awkward and told me about Manny. He told me that Manny had made a huge mistake at work since then and had been transferred as a demotion with a pay cut. But he said that Manny had become arrogant to everyone around him, refusing to admit his own faults. And as a result of his demotion, he started going to pubs and bars to vent his stress out and started to spend a lot of money on drinks and women. There are rumors that he has been paying quite a bit to the woman he met there, and he has even been using his own mother's pension in order to pay for the women. In other words, he is spending Tessa's money without any permission. But Manny was still unable to do his job properly, and the company was wondering when to fire him. And it was around that time Manny began not coming to work, without any prior notice. So, the company fired Manny. When I asked him when he began to do that, it was right around the time when my ex-husband and I met again. I was sure that he had paid a lot of money to that woman at that time and had been dumped by her. So he stopped coming to work because he got depressed. Tessa probably would never have thought that her own son would become unemployed, being fired from his job, and that he would just be all depressed in his room. I think it's nice that my ex-husband took the fall on his own, and I think I'll forget about my ex-husband now and live happily ever after with my current husband and our sweet little child. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel. See you in our next video.
You're not even a doctor. You can't do anything. It doesn't make any sense for you to be there. Of course, our daughter is better off with you than with me.
My husband was appealing that there would be no problem if he went on an overseas trip under the current circumstances. As I listened to him, I felt the little love I had left for my husband disappeared completely. My name is Alice, a 27-year-old housewife. I met my husband Felix, who is 10 years older than me, at the company I started working for after I graduated from college. Although my husband and I were in different departments, we started talking when he saved me from a drunken senior colleague at a company drinking party. And we started our relationship that ended in marriage 2 years later. My father died when I was very young, and my mother raised me as a single mother. When my mother was informed about my marriage, she was so happy that she cried. After 4 years of working, I was enjoying my job and planned to continue working after marriage, but my husband asked me to stop working.
We can make our living with only my salary. That's more than enough.
Yes, but I don't want to quit. I enjoy my job.
Why? Other women have a hard time working and doing house chores and raising children. But Alice, you could be a full-time housewife. What's wrong with that?
My husband is a quick-witted, older, and well-spoken, so my opinion was never recognized when we had a discussion. My husband thinks that this is the best way for me. When he says he's saying it because he loves me, I can't argue with him. Without a resolution to our discussions, I became pregnant and had to resign from my job due to severe morning sickness and the risk of premature delivery. My husband was overjoyed that I resigned. Although I wanted to continue working, I was secretly relieved that I didn't have to argue with my husband anymore. However, I soon began to regret my decision to have left my job. Once I was in a stable period of pregnancy, and my condition became stable too, my husband started to pay only $300 a month for living expenses. Utilities and rent were deducted from our bank account, but $300 for 2 adults was hard to meet. My husband did not even pay my phone bill. When I asked him for more money to put into the house, he refused.
You don't need a phone because you're a housewife.
He told me that if I didn't have enough money for living expenses, I should just pay from my own savings. I had only been working for 3 years, but I had saved money through part-time jobs since college. So I had about $2,000 in savings, but I didn't want to touch that money for the sake of our child's future. I felt threatened by my husband's attitude, so I made every effort not to use my savings. However, during my pregnancy, I absolutely could not give up my smartphone in case something happened to me. So I switched to a low-cost carrier and paid the fees from my savings. I felt suffocated since the newlyweds because I felt like my husband was monitoring me. But my mother and mother-in-law supported me. My mother-in-law loved on her only son, my husband, but she also cared for me as his wife. She was concerned about my many troubles in the early stage of my pregnancy and regularly sent me vegetables and daily necessities so that I would not have to carry heavy things home. I was so grateful. It's natural to take care of someone who became your daughter-in-law. She told me like that. As soon as I got married, I noticed that my husband is committing moral harassment. But my in-laws are very nice people, so I believed that their son would be a good father who would love his child once our baby is born. My mother also bought many necessary things for the newborn, such as clothes and stroller. As I stared at my belly, which was getting bigger by the day, I told myself that my husband would surely change after the birth of our child. However, my hopes were shattered when my water broke at home. The contractions were getting shorter and shorter, and I was about to call the hospital when my water broke at home. This was my first birth. How could my water broke at home? I was panicked. I called my husband for help, but he looked at me and said unthinkable.
Whoa, you are dirty. You are never getting in my car, so take a cab.
With that, my husband went back to his room. I was shocked and cried, but I didn't have time to cry. I called a labor cab I had reserved and went to the hospital alone with a hospitalization kit I had prepared. The nurses at the obstetrician's office were surprised to see me at the hospital alone in the middle of the night with my water breaking. Wasn't there anyone to accompany you? I could only reply with a wry smile to the nurse. Then I gave birth to a healthy girl. I needed to tell my husband, but I was anxious to see how he would react. But my husband was so happy to see our baby, as if he had forgotten that he said I was dirty when my water broke. And he immediately left his workplace and came to the hospital. It was only through the window, but my husband seemed thrilled to see our daughter. But I could not forget what he had said and done during my pregnancy, and what he had said to me when my water broke. I asked my father-in-law to name our daughter. More and more people these days don't like their in-laws naming their children. But I didn't want my husband to name her, and I didn't think he would let me name her. My daughter was named Lara. After leaving the hospital, I managed to do housework and raise my child with the help of my mother and mother-in-law. My husband only gave Lara milk once in a while and never bathed or changed her diaper. But this was better than I imagined. But I couldn't trust him anymore because my husband would make me take pictures of him feeding our daughter and then post the pictures on social media to show off. He received many comments about what a good husband he was and how people wanted their husbands to learn from him. And my husband felt satisfied. In reality, however, when he finished taking the picture, he would interrupt watching after Lara, even though she is still drinking her milk, and let me do it. My husband doesn't take care of our daughter at all, except when taking pictures. The situation was further aggravated when my daughter started crying at night. My husband and I had separate bedrooms, but it seems that her crying reached him, and he got angry at me for being too noisy. On top of that, he would say,
"What a useless mother you are if you can get your child to stop crying.
and
You can't even live without me. You're so useless."
I was mentally drained from the lack of sleep due to my daughter's crying at night, and I could not stop crying whenever my husband said such things to me. Divorce crossed my mind, but my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and mother are all convinced that things are amicable between us. Besides, I was not confident that I, a housewife, would be able to raise my daughter on my own. Then one day, I received a call that my mother had been involved in a traffic accident and had been rushed to the hospital. When I took my daughter to the hospital, my mother was still in surgery. The surgery was a success, but my mother did not wake up immediately. With my 4-month-old daughter in tow, I couldn't stay at the hospital forever, so I went home, even if I wanted to be by my mother. I had to prepare dinner, but I was in no mood to do so. I was sitting idle, taking care of my daughter at the minimum, and doing nothing else when my husband came home.
"You didn't prepare dinner? What are you doing?"
My husband yelled at me, but I wasn't scared at all, probably because I was distracted by my mother. My mother had an accident, and she hasn't regained consciousness. I want to stay with her at the hospital tomorrow, so can you take care of Lara while I'm there?
"I can't. I'm going on an overseas trip tomorrow with my friends."
I didn't know what my husband was talking about. Wait a minute. What overseas trip? You didn't tell. Besides, you're going on an overseas trip at a time like this?
"I don't need to ask your permission for whatever I'm going to spend my hard-earned money on."
I'm not talking about money. I'm saying that my mom is in a lot of trouble, and I want you to stop traveling and stay with Lara. Of course, I don't intend to let my husband do all of the care of Lara, but I wanted my husband to be there in case something happened. But my husband sighed, and they said to me, as if he were telling a child who was not a good listener,
"Your mother is not going to make it. Your being there for her won't help. Then you'd better take care of your daughter. Even your mother would want that.
What are you talking about? Why are you being so horrible?
You're the one being awful. You're trying to take all my fun for someone who can't be saved anymore. I will be home in time for her funeral, so let me go on a relaxing trip.
I thought my husband was not human. No human being could have said this. I decided to let my husband do what he wanted, thinking that any more would be a waste of time. Okay then.
If you understand, then fine.
My husband smiled in satisfaction at my response and went to his room, perhaps to prepare for the trip. Until then, I had told myself that my husband's unreasonable words and actions were because he loved me. However, I can't believe that my husband loves me when he goes on an overseas trip under such circumstances and leaves me alone. I have pretended not to notice until now, but I'm sure that to my husband, I'm a wife who is naive and obedient. However, I have come to my senses. Growing up in a single mother household, I felt lonely without a father, and I didn't want my daughter to feel that way. However, I realized that the reason I missed my father so much was that I had fond memories of him being kind to me. I decided to divorce my husband because I thought he was no longer necessary for my daughter. My husband was just going on an overseas trip, so it was convenient for me to prepare for the divorce without his knowledge. The next day, my husband, who knew nothing about it, left for his overseas trip in a good mood. Fortunately, my mother regained consciousness. She said that if she works hard at the rehabilitation, the after effects of the accident will hardly remain. When I told my mother that I was going to divorce Felix, she was surprised, but said she would support me. However, I could see that even in the event of a divorce, if I didn't have something in my favor, I would be backed down. My husband would never admit his fault, and there was no way he would accept something that would be to his advantage. A speedy divorce after 2 years of marriage and 4 months after the birth of our daughter. That would be bad damage for him, so Felix would want to avoid it. Then, I took a look at my husband's social networking sites. I thought that if my husband was so enthusiastic on social networking sites about being a good husband and good father, there might be something to it. I checked his social networking site and found an unbelievable post in which he said he left his daughter with his mother and traveled abroad with his wife, feeling like newlywed. I continued to check and found that my husband had also posted pictures of a woman he claimed was his wife, since they were all pictures of her hands and her back, with no face in the picture, and she was almost the same height as me. Someone might think it was me. However, it is clear that the woman is not me. This was the first time I knew that my husband was cheating on me. I had been preoccupied with child care and my husband's moods, but when I thought about it more carefully, I realized that everything was wrong. I had a little bit of evidence of my husband's moral harassment, so I thought that if I combined these social networking photos with the evidence, we would definitely get a divorce. After that, I was a little overwhelmed, but I told my in-laws that I was divorcing Felix. At first, they tried to discourage me from divorcing him for the sake of our daughter. But when I told them the reason for the divorce, my in-laws were furious with my husband. They then told me the most outrageous thing. In fact, my husband had been engaged to a woman about 4 years before he married me. But the engagement had been called off because of his moral harassment. My in-laws had been concerned about me since the beginning of our marriage because they were worried that Felix might be morally harassing me and that we would get divorced. My in-laws got down on their knees and apologized to me, but I have nothing against them. They promised to be fully on my side and told me that if my husband did not pay alimony or child support, they would pay it instead. After that, I continued to check my husband's social networking sites and noticed something. In the comment section, where people had been praising my husband, I began to see comments criticizing him for leaving our 4-month-old daughter with his mother while he traveled abroad. The critical comments, which were few at first, increased each time he posted a picture of the trip. Seeing this, I thought that I could use this. When all the divorce preparations were over, I saw a post on my husband's social media that the happy time was over and he was going back home. My husband even wrote down the time of his flight, so I waited until he is on his way and posted, "I'm the wife of this man. The woman in the picture is not me." I wrote that in the comment section. I was skeptical that people would believe me, but the comment section got so many reactions faster than I had imagined. It seems that people who had known my husband since his school days and people from his company were watching his social media. And in no time at all, the comment section was overflowing with his misdeeds in his school life, to the fact that he had broken off his former engagement due to moral harassment. I laughed as the comment section told of the end of my husband's smooth sailing life. It matched well with his caption, "The happy time is over." Later, when my husband came home in a good mood, he still hadn't been on social media. I asked him for a divorce. "Divorce me."
Are you sulking? I'm sorry, you will be in good mood soon.
He gave me an accessory as a souvenir, but I'm not happy because I know from social media posts that my husband sent a more expensive accessory of the same brand to his adulterous partner. I don't want that. Please divorce me.
Wait a minute, what's going on?
He suddenly sounded downright flirtatious, as if he could tell from my attitude that I really wanted a divorce. My husband tried to put his hand on my shoulder, and when I shook it off, he looked annoyed for a moment. If I had been my usual self, I would have tried hard to put my husband in a good mood. But now, to my own surprise, I felt nothing. My husband became more and more impatient with my unusual attitude and began to shake his head.
Do you know what you're doing? Are you taking fatherhood away from our daughter? Can you support a child by yourself even though you are a housewife?
The money will be fine. I will work like hell.
It's not going to be okay for a naive person like you. You just have to listen to me all the time.
My husband denies everything if I try to do something he doesn't like. Having had the experience of leaving my job in a way that caused problems for people in my company, I thought that Felix was right. I should have resigned as soon as I got married. However, I'm not going to follow my husband's lead anymore. You're the naive one.
What are you talking about?
In these times when the world is so strict about adultery, how can you be traveling with an adulterer when your wife's mother is unconscious? He didn't expect me to know that he was having an affair. My husband obviously started to get upset, though.
Ah, I know what you're talking about. Now you're going to make up some damning story and get alimony from me, right?
Why don't you look at your social networking sites? My husband rushed to look at his social media, and his face turned pale.
What is this?
Everyone was fooled, so I just wrote the truth.
Don't be silly.
My husband yelled at me loudly, but I was not afraid of him, as I was fully prepared. I've already told your parents. I'm also consulting a lawyer who is good at divorce.
Do you know what you're doing?
You don't have time to deal with me, don't you? Why don't you do something about that social networking site? My husband is desperately trying to do something, as if he thought it was indeed a bad situation. In the meantime, I left the divorce papers and left our house. However, there was no way my divorce from my husband would go smoothly, so we both decided to get a lawyer. At first, my husband was very stubborn, but his reputation at work seems to be going downhill, and I could see that he was becoming more and more exhausted. In fact, the woman who broke off the engagement due to moral harassment and the current adulterer are both from the same company. The adulterer left the company because it became difficult for her to stay in the company. She was in a relationship within the company and had to break up with her boyfriend as well.
There is no way you can get a divorce. And if you get a divorce, I will ask for alimony.
My husband said like this, but now he started to say that he would get back together with me if it were now.
I will divorce you, so don't ask for alimony or child support.
Then he said this, and suddenly he would say,
I love you. Please give me a second chance.
He changed his attitude 100 times, but of course I ignored all of them. In the end, the divorce was finalized in a way that all my claims were accepted. After that, my ex-husband's reputation at work fell to the ground, and his boss recommended that he voluntarily resign from his job. My husband got angry and said,
I don't want to work at this kind of company. I will quit on my own.
He is now living with part-time jobs because he can't find another job. I received both alimony and child support in one lump sum, so I don't care about that. After that, my mother was able to rehabilitate and was not left with any after effects at all. I have successfully found a job, and I'm raising my daughter with my mother's help. I have my hands full with my daughter, but it was a surprise when my mom got a boyfriend. The boyfriend's wife passed away years ago, and he raised his daughter by himself. He and his daughter have been very good to us. My daughter doesn't have a father, but she has many people who take care of her and don't make her feel lonely. My husband tried to remarry, but my mother-in-law said to that woman who came to greet the marriage, this son of mine is a moral harasser and has broken off an engagement, and he's also divorced for moral harassment and adultery. Is that still okay with you? She asked her, and that's why she ran away. My ex-husband was so shocked to see the kind and gentle mother-in-law say such a thing. Since the incident on social networking sites, my ex-husband, who had been abandoned even by his friends from school days, realized that he had no allies at all, and now he is living a solitary and simple life alone in a small apartment.